Welcome to Horrific Stories. Today's tale is a terrifying journey filled with suspense and chilling twists. If you love horror, don't forget to subscribe for more spine-tingling tales. The Piazza, the haunting of the Villisca Axe Murder House, a real-life horror 911 call case. The Villisca Axe Murders occurred in 1912 in the small town of Villisca, Iowa. Though this gruesome crime happened long before 911 systems existed, the house itself would later become the site of a chilling paranormal 911 call in the 2000s, when its dark history seemed to come alive once again. The 1912 Murders. On June 10, 1912, a quiet rural town was forever changed by one of the most brutal unsolved murders in American history. The Moore family, Josiah and Sarah Moore, along with their 4 children and 2 young guests, were found bludgeoned to death in their beds with an axe. The crime scene was horrifying. Blood spattered the walls, and the killer had covered all the mirrors with cloth, leaving behind an eerie and unexplainable sense of foreboding. The case baffled investigators for years. Despite several suspects, including a traveling preacher and a known serial killer, no one was ever convicted. The house where the murders took place soon gained a reputation for being haunted, and it became a destination for paranormal investigators and thrill-seekers alike. The paranormal investigations begin. In the early 2000s, the Villisca Axe Murder House became a hotspot for ghost hunters, with countless reports of strange occurrences, footsteps when no one was there, doors slamming shut, and whispers in the darkness. The house was said to be plagued by the spirits of the victims and possibly even the murderer, their souls trapped in the place of their violent deaths. One night in 2014, a group of amateur ghost hunters rented the house for an overnight investigation. Armed with cameras, voice recorders, and a deep curiosity for the supernatural, they hoped to capture evidence of the hauntings that had been reported for decades. The 911 call. It was around 2 a.m. when the atmosphere in the house took a terrifying turn. According to one of the investigators, the group was sitting in the children's room where Lena and Ina Stillinger, the Moore children's friends, had been murdered. Suddenly, one of the investigators, Robert, began acting strangely. He was silent at first, his face pale and eyes wide, as if staring at something no one else could see. Then, without warning, he began muttering incoherently. The rest of the group initially thought Robert was playing a prank, but it soon became clear that something was very wrong. Robert started shouting, claiming he could hear voices telling him to get out and leave. His behavior escalated quickly, and in a moment of sheer panic, he grabbed a knife from his equipment bag and stabbed himself in the chest, saying the voices were making him do it. The group, horrified and confused, immediately called 911. The emergency response. The 911 operator could hear the fear in the caller's voice as they pleaded for help. "He stabbed himself! Please, we need help now!" When police and paramedics arrived at the scene, they found Robert on the floor, bleeding from a self-inflicted chest wound, but still conscious. He was rushed to the hospital, where doctors managed to save his life. Later, he had no memory of what had happened, other than feeling an overwhelming sense of dread and hearing voices telling him to harm himself. The aftermath. This chilling incident added a new layer of fear to the already infamous Villisca Axe Murder House. While skeptics argued that the atmosphere of the house and the group's fixation on the paranormal could have contributed to Robert's actions, others believed that the house itself was responsible for driving him to such extremes. To this day, the house remains open for tours and overnight stays, and it continues to draw both curious tourists and serious paranormal investigators. Visitors often report strange happenings, lights flickering, cold spots, and feelings of being watched. Some even claim to hear the distant sound of children crying or footsteps echoing through the halls. The 911 call stands as one of the most terrifying real-life encounters tied to the supernatural, where the line between the living and the dead seemed to blur, and the tragic past of the Villisca Axe Murder House came back to haunt the present. Legacy of fear. The Villisca case remains a terrifying reminder of how real-life horror can transcend time, leaving behind echoes of violence and fear that continue to affect those who dare to investigate. Whether it's the spirits of the murdered Moore family, the lingering presence of their killer, or something darker entirely, the house at 508 East 2nd Street still holds a grip on anyone who enters. The terrifying 911 call from the Hinsdale House. The Hinsdale House, a secluded, eerie farmhouse in Hinsdale, New York, is a place wrapped in dark history and paranormal lore. It has been the site of alleged hauntings, exorcisms, and strange occurrences for decades. One chilling 911 call made from the house in 2015 catapulted it back into the spotlight, leaving investigators and authorities both shaken and confused. The dark history of Hinsdale House. The house was built in the mid-1800s and has been the site of numerous tragedies over the years. Local legend holds that the property is cursed, with tales of suicides, murders, and occult practices tied to the land. In the 1970s, the house became infamous after the Dandy family moved in. They reported a series of terrifying events, objects moving on their own, disembodied voices, shadowy figures, and even apparitions of long-dead family members. At one point, the hauntings grew so intense that the family called in a priest to perform an exorcism, though it did little to calm the supernatural occurrences. After the Dandys fled the property, the house stood empty for years, drawing only the occasional paranormal investigator or thrill seeker. However, the legend of Hinsdale House never faded. The 911 call. A paranormal investigation goes horribly wrong. In 2015, a team of paranormal investigators rented the house for an overnight investigation, eager to uncover the secrets of the haunted property. They arrived at dusk, setting up their cameras and voice recorders in key areas of the house: the basement, the living room where most of the Dandy family's experiences occurred, and the upstairs bedrooms. As the night went on, they began to feel a growing sense of dread. What started as minor disturbances, faint knocks, cold drafts, and a feeling of being watched, soon escalated into something far more terrifying. Around 1:30 a.m., the team was conducting an EVP, electronic voice phenomenon session in the upstairs bedroom, hoping to capture ghostly voices on their recorders. As they asked questions, one of the investigators, Kelsey, suddenly gasped and froze. She claimed she could see a figure standing in the corner of the room, a dark shadow that seemed to be watching them. The others, unable to see the figure, initially brushed it off, as Kelsey being spooked by the environment. Then the noises started. First, there were faint whispers that seemed to come from the walls. Next, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, even though no one was upstairs but them. The group's tension mounted. But it wasn't until Kelsey suddenly collapsed to the floor, screaming in pain and clutching her throat, that panic truly set in. The call for help. The group scrambled to help Kelsey, but something seemed to be holding her down. Her eyes were wide with terror as she gasped for breath, clawing at her throat as though something invisible was choking her. Frantic, her friends grabbed their phones and called 911. The call to the police was desperate, chaotic, and terrifying. "We need help!" one of the investigators shouted to the 911 operator. "She can't breathe. Something's attacking her." The operator, trying to remain calm, asked if there was an intruder in the house, but the response only added to the mystery. "No, there's no one here. It's It's something else." The terror in the caller's voice was palpable, and the operator dispatched local police and an ambulance to the scene immediately. The emergency response. When first responders arrived at the Hinsdale House, they found Kelsey lying on the floor of the upstairs bedroom, still gasping for air but no longer struggling as violently. Paramedics quickly tended to her, noting that she had no visible injuries, but she seemed to be in shock. They transported her to the hospital for further evaluation. Meanwhile, the police conducted a search of the house, looking for signs of an intruder or any logical explanation for what had happened. They found nothing. The house was empty except for the investigators, and there were no signs of forced entry or struggle. The other investigators were visibly shaken, recounting the strange events to the officers, but their story seemed impossible to believe. Kelsey, after being stabilized at the hospital, later told investigators that she felt as though a pair of icy hands had gripped her throat during the incident, squeezing the life out of her. She had no recollection of collapsing or the chaos that ensued. The aftermath. The incident at Hinsdale House added yet another chapter to its dark and haunted history. Though skeptics suggested that the investigators might have worked themselves into a state of panic, or that Kelsey suffered a psychological breakdown, others believed that the paranormal activity in the house had escalated that night. Kelsey never returned to Hinsdale House after the terrifying experience, and the rest of the team remained deeply affected by what they witnessed. The chilling 911 call stands as a disturbing reminder of the house's haunted reputation, a place where the lines between reality and the paranormal become dangerously blurred. To this day, the Hinsdale House continues to attract those fascinated by its mysteries, but few who enter are prepared for what they may encounter inside. Whether driven by spirits tied to the land or something even darker, the house remains a focal point for unexplained phenomena and fear. The disturbing 911 call from the Watcher House. In 2014, a family in Westfield, New Jersey, moved into what seemed to be their dream home, a beautiful, sprawling 6-bedroom house at 657 Boulevard. Little did they know, the house came with a terrifying and mysterious stalker. What began as a series of threatening letters turned into a chilling 911 call that still haunts the town to this day. The Watcher. Letters begin. Shortly after Derek and Maria Broaddus purchased the house, they began receiving strange, anonymous letters from someone who called themselves the Watcher. The first letter arrived just 3 days after they moved in, addressed simply to the new owner. The content of the letter was both cryptic and disturbing. 657. Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades. I have been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and my father watched it in the 1960s. It is now my time. As the letters continued, they became more threatening. The Watcher claimed to know intimate details about the family, including the names of their 3 children, their ages, and where they played in the yard. The tone of the letters shifted from ominous curiosity to dark obsession. Do you need to fill the house with the young blood I requested? Once I know their names, I will call to them and draw them to me. The family was horrified. Despite installing a security system, they constantly felt watched. The Broadduses reported the letters to the police, but no one could identify the sender. The police conducted interviews with neighbors and even investigated the former owners of the house, but the Watcher remained elusive. The night of the 911 call. One night, just weeks after receiving another menacing letter, the family awoke to strange noises outside their house. Derek and Maria were on edge, having spent weeks in fear after receiving increasingly threatening correspondence. This night, however, would push their anxiety to its peak. Around midnight, Derek was jolted awake by the sound of something metallic scraping against the house. He listened intently and realized it wasn't just an animal. It sounded deliberate, like someone was outside. Fear overtook him. Could it be the Watcher, finally acting on their threats? Derek grabbed a flashlight and cautiously crept to the window. What he saw chilled him to his core. A dark figure standing just beyond the tree line, motionless, staring up at the house. He couldn't make out the person's face, but it was clear the figure was fixated on the home. In a panic, Derek woke Maria, and she immediately dialed 911. The 911 call, Maria's voice trembled as she spoke to the dispatcher. "There's someone outside our house. They've been stalking us for weeks, leaving us letters. We need help, now." The dispatcher asked for more information, but Maria's panic made it difficult to explain the full story. "We've been getting these letters from someone calling themselves the Watcher. They're watching us right now. Please send someone quickly." The police arrived within minutes, but by the time they conducted a search of the property, the mysterious figure had vanished into the night. No footprints, no signs of forced entry, and no clues as to who the figure might have been. The officers took the report seriously, aware of the unsettling letters the family had received, but they were left with no evidence and no suspect. The aftermath. The police increased their patrols around 657 Boulevard, but the Watcher's letters continued to arrive, each more threatening than the last. In one of the final letters, the Watcher made a chilling statement. Maybe a car accident, maybe a fire, maybe something as simple as a mild illness that never seems to go away but makes you feel sick day after day after day after day after day. Maybe the mysterious death of a pet. Loved ones suddenly die. Planes and cars and bicycles crash. Bones break. The Broaddus family's sense of safety was shattered. Despite their initial excitement about the house, they never moved in. They couldn't risk their children's safety or continue living in constant fear. Eventually, they sold the house at a loss, still haunted by the terrifying ordeal. The mystery remains. The true identity of the Watcher has never been discovered. Despite the efforts of law enforcement, private investigators, and even DNA testing on the letters, the case remains unsolved. Was it a neighbor with a grudge, a deranged stranger, or was the Watcher's family truly tied to the house for generations as they claimed? The story of the Watcher house remains one of the most bizarre and unsettling mysteries in modern American history. The 911 call, made in the dead of night while the family feared for their lives, is just one chilling moment in a saga of fear, obsession, and unanswered questions. The house at 657 Boulevard stands as a symbol of that terror, an ordinary home that became the site of a very real, living nightmare. Thanks for watching. Horrific Stories. If you enjoyed this chilling tale, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more spine-tingling stories. Until next time, keep your lights on and your fears closed.